Good morning, friends. Today we shall look at invoices. We shall look at what Isbp, the International Standard Banking Practice, has to elaborate on invoices, para C1 to para C15. While looking at invoices, the title of the invoice. When an invoice is called for by the documentary credit, any type of invoice can be submitted. It can be named as commercial invoice, customs invoice, tax invoice, final invoice, consular invoice. Any name is acceptable. Any name of the document presented is acceptable. It should not be called as provisional, pro forma, or something similar to that. It should not be titled in a fashion that it is something prior to issuance of the actual. It is a sample or it is a indicative. That reference should not be there, and any other title of the invoice is acceptable when invoice is called for. When a commercial invoice is called for, the presentation of a document titled invoice is acceptable. The word commercial need not appear as a part of the title in the document submitted, but even if it states it's issued for the tax purpose, such an invoice is acceptable. Coming to the issuer of the invoice, the invoice should appear to have been issued by the beneficiary, and if it is a transferable credit, by the second beneficiary. Invoice should appear to have been issued by the beneficiary, and invoice should appear and if there is a second beneficiary, or if the beneficiary of the LC had undergone a legal change in name, then they can mention the new entity's name and say in the brackets formerly known as, so that both the names are linked and identified. Invoice should be most of the time drawn on the applicant of the LC, and if it's a transferable LC, it can be drawn on first beneficiary. Regarding goods, services, or performance, the LC can be opened for goods, for services, or for some other performance, and it will be given in detail in the description field in the letter of credit. The document presented, whether called as commercial invoice or a normal invoice, the document presented, the goods description should correspond with the description in the credit. There is no requirement for a mirror image, but it should correspond to the description in the credit. This is the only document in which most of the or all the details given in the letter of credit should appear in the invoice. In other documents, it can be in generic terms. So when we say correspond, if the letter of credit is calling for black polyester full shirts with size 40 packed in 10 per packet, then the invoice can say in one place shirt, in another place polyester, made of polyester, in another place it can say color black, and in another it can say size 40, and it will be acceptable. It need not exactly say black full sleeves polyester shirts of 40 size. So it can be the description of the goods in the invoice can be mentioned in different places, in different areas, in bits and pieces. But when read together, it should correspond with the description credit, and when read together, there is no need for a mirror image, but should not conflict with the credit. The invoice should reflect actually what has been shipped. If 10 cars and 5 buses have been ordered, and if 1 car and 1 bus has been shipped, the invoice should say 1 car and 1 ship, and the price of 1 car and 1 ship should be drawn under the LC. The invoice may also state the exact goods description given in the letter of credit. That is, it can say 5 cars and 10 buses, but it should also say actually shipped 1 car and 1 bus. It may indicate additional data. What additional data? That do not appear to refer to different nature, classification, or category of the goods. It can refer to another. If shoes is called for, or leather shoes is called for, it should not talk about something which like damaged leather shoe or a second-hand machinery or things like that. So the description in the invoice which has additional information is acceptable as long as that information does not change the nature of goods, does not change the classification of goods, does not change the category of goods. So polyester shirt and cotton shirt will be different, size 40 and size 41 will be different, or some other information, full sleeve shirts, instead of shirt it says a t-shirt. The LC calls for shirt and the invoice says t-shirt, then it will be a discrepancy because the t-shirt and shirts are considered different from a banker's perspective when we examine documents under UCP. The invoice should indicate value of the goods shipped. Invoice should indicate the unit price if stated in the credit. If not stated, unit price is not necessary, the total value should be there. The currency should be same as in the credit. The currency of the invoice should be same as the currency of the credit. If the value is given in any other currency, the currency in the credit should also be mentioned so as to ensure that the drawing is well within the amount allowed in the credit. Any discount or deduction required by the credit should be given in the invoice. Not only discount or deduction, breakup if the invoice calls for a CIF or a DDU transaction, but invoice also, the LC calls for a CIF transaction, but invoice should mention the cost of insurance or cost of freight. If desired by the LC, it should be mentioned in the invoice. So the breakups or discount and deductions, if called for by the LC, should be mentioned in the invoice. Invoice may indicate deductions or advance payments or discounts not stated in the credit. Invoice may state certain deductions which are not mentioned in the credit. Invoice may be drawn for overall 100, and then it will show 10 paid as advance, 10 payable as retention money, 5 payable against a performance bond, and things like that. So ultimately it will be drawing only 75 or 80 out of 100. So that is acceptable. The deductions in the invoice on the total value is acceptable, whether it is stated in the credit or not. If stated in the credit, it should compulsorily mention. If not stated in the credit, it need not mention, but if it mentions, it is okay. The invoice is to indicate the trade term stated in the credit and in full. What is a trade term? FOB, CFR, CIF. These are the Incoterms. Now, if the letter of credit says CIF Singapore Incoterms 2010, then the word CIF, the word Singapore, word Incoterm, word 2010, all should appear on the invoice. Mentioning CIF Singapore alone will meet the commercial requirement but not the requirements of the invoice for examination of documents under UCP. It should be stated in full as mentioned in the credit. Additional charges and costs such as those related to documentation, freight, insurance are to be included within the value. If the LC allows drawing of $100 and if the invoice is drawn for $100, the cost of freight, the cost of insurance, cost of documentation, everything should be within this $100. And it can show breakup, but it should be within the $100 because maximum permissible amount to be drawn under the LC will be 100, irrespective of the fact that the price quoted is CIF and then these costs are incurred by the party who is shipping the goods. Invoice need not be dated or signed. The commercial practice is not to be dated or signed, but the LC may call for dated and signed. So normally you will see letter of credits stating manually signed commercial invoices. That's how it is. And if the presentation period or the tenor or any other thing had to be tagged to the date of invoice, then definitely the invoice has to be dated. The total quantity of the goods and their weight or measurement should not conflict with the credit. If the letter of credit mentions the quantity of the goods and if invoice also mentions the quantity of goods, it should not be in conflict. If the unit price or the quantity is not mentioned in the credit, it need not be mentioned in the invoice. This quantity is compulsory because if there are 5 cars and 10 buses called for, it should not be showing 6 cars or 9 buses, provided the partial shipment aspect has been taken care. Now, there are certain things which invoice should not indicate. What are the things that invoice should not indicate? Invoice should not indicate overshipment. If 5 cars are called for, 6 cars should not be shipped. Goods, services and performance not called for. If the only cars are called for and car covers are not called for, it will not be shipped. If computers are called for, not necessary that monitors should be included or keyboards should be included, unless the letter of credit gives detailed description of what is called for in the letter of to be shipped by the beneficiary. Invoice should not indicate samples or advertising material, and additional quantity of goods called for in the credit stated to be free of cost. Even if a letter of credit calls for certain goods and then the invoice ships the same goods little extra and says this is free of cost, says this is for advertising, this is for sample, such should not be given. For example, when you buy a software or a hardware, a manual that comes along with it is considered as a part and parcel of it. But if you find posters, it is called advertising material, and the posters to promote that particular goods should not be given free of cost. In certain industries, for pharmaceuticals, when you buy 1000 units of a particular medicine or drug, 10 units will be given free of cost, called physician's sample, to be distributed free. Such things should not be included in the letter of credit, should not be included in the invoice unless the letter of credit includes that. So additional quantity of the goods called for by the credit, samples or advertising materials or goods not called for should not be mentioned in the credit. And whatever has been called for, it should not be overshipped. That is additional quantity of those goods. Even if it is mentioned as free of cost, it should not be overshipped. Quantity. The quantity drawn under the invoice can be plus or minus 5%. The quantity drawn can be plus or minus 5% in the invoice. The positive 5% tolerance in the quantity of goods does not allow a similar positive 5% tolerance in the amount. The quantity drawn can go up, but the amount drawn cannot go beyond the LC amount. This tolerance plus or 5% on the quantity will not apply when the credit states the quantity should not be reduced or curtailed or exceeded or whatever. If the credit is very strict about the quantity, this tolerance of plus or minus 5% does not apply. Also, this tolerance will not apply when the credit states the goods in the terms of number of units, 100 bales, 100 liters, 1 dozen, 5 computers. So, when it is stating in the number of units or number of packaging units or individual items as quantity in the credit, then the invoice cannot have plus or minus 5% extra in quantity to be shipped. Now, even when partial shipments are permitted, drawing of the LC up to 5% less is allowed. Even when partial shipments are prohibited, drawing of the LC up to 5% less in the credit amount may be allowed. So, LC is for $100 and a drawing of $95 is allowed even when partial shipments are prohibited, provided no quantity of goods is stated in the credit, and if stated, that quantity is drawn in full. So, if the LC is for $100, the invoice can be drawn for $95. It will not be considered as partial shipment, and it will be permitted even if partial shipment is prohibited, provided the quantity is as stated in the credit and quantity is not stated in number of pieces or number of items. With respect to installment drawings or installment shipments, if any installment is not drawn or shipped within the period allowed for, credit ceases to be available for that any subsequent shipment. If any installment or drawing or shipment is not made within the permitted time period, the credit ceases to be available for that shipment and any further shipment. Suppose the LC says 100 units should be shipped in January, 100 in February, 100 in March, and in January 100 has been shipped, in February only 50 has been shipped, 100 not shipped, the balance 50 cannot be shipped in March. Not only that, the 100 supposed to have been shipped in March can also be not be shipped unless and until the issuing bank and applicant agrees to amend the LC. This is installment shipment. Any installment not drawn or not shipped within the given period will make the LC not available for any further shipment, including that portion not drawn. Now, the given periods are sequence of dates or timelines that determine the start and end date for a period. When somebody says a shipment should be 100 units in January, it means 1st January to 31st January. 100 units in February means 1st February to 28th February or 29th February as applicable. Partial shipments, if allowed by the credit, if partial drawings are allowed by the credit, then any number of drawings or shipments is permitted within each installment, which means when 100 is to be shipped in January, you can ship one every day till it reaches 100 till 31st of January. Now, installment shipping and partial shipments are two different things, and credit has to explicitly state whether the partial shipments prohibited clause allowed by the Isbp and UCP still stands or that clause is not applicable. These are used in situations when the exact quantity to be shipped under the particular drawing or the LC is required to feed the production line of the buyer. When the schedule is indicated by a number of latest dates and not a given period, when it says by 31st March, 31st April, 30th June and like that and not a period, then this is not installment shipment. Only when period is given, this is installment shipment. When it is latest date is given, this is not installment shipment. Article 32 will not apply. Article 32 talks about installment shipment. Article 32 will not apply. Article 31 will apply. 31 talks about partial shipments. And then when partial drawings or partial shipments are allowed, any number of shipments is permitted on or before each latest date. Likewise here, when partial shipments are allowed, any number of drawings are allowed within each installment, within each period, here within the last date. So this is a small peek look at the what Isbp has to elaborate on the invoices, para C1 to C35. Please keep coming back for another session on another aspect of Isbp. Thanks for watching.